Okay, good.
See how that works. Well, it's sort of, I don't know about the angle. I'm not sure it's my best side. All right. I thought it would be helpful for us to actually learn those 39 books of the Old Testament while we're working on the Old Testament. How many of you can say the 39 books of the Old Testament in order? Now, if any of you, were churchgoers like I was, and in the Southern Baptist denomination, we had to learn those things, man. And I knew them at one time, but I'm going to be reviewing with you. However, I've got some helps for you to learn these. So what can we, don't you think it would be kind of bad really to study the Bible and not know what the books of the Bible were when we were done? So I think that's worth doing, okay? We have some mnemonic devices to help us. You'll be glad to know about that. That's not demonic devices, that's mnemonic devices. And so here we go. The Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible. Have you all learned what those are yet? Genesis. All right, help me out here. Genesis. Exodus. Okay, let's stop just a second here for those of you who may be just learning these. Genesis is the beginning. That's what it means. Okay? In Hebrew, Bereshit, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But after the beginning, and Genesis from chapter 12 on, tells us the story of Abraham and then the patriarchs, Noah and those guys. And Ham, Shem, and Japheth. We'll talk about those guys later on. But after Exodus, what happens at the end of Exodus? Moses does not get to go and enter the promised land, right? So who is chosen to lead Moses into the promised land? Joshua. So chronologically, Joshua is the next person to show up, right? Easy so far. I'm sorry. What am I doing? I jumped a gear there. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. Leviticus takes its name from the tribe of Levi. Okay? Numbers. And Deuteronomy. Now, Joshua comes in. So it's not Moses who leads the tribes into the promised land, but it's Joshua, right? Okay. Remember this little phrase, Joshua judges Ruth. Who judges Ruth? Joshua. Okay. Those are the next 3 books of the Bible. Joshua, Judges, and Ruth. So those 3 come as a unit, right? You remember that phrase. That's your first mnemonic device for remembering the next 3 books of the Bible. Now, I want you to remember, if I get these right, SKC. 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. So you got 6 more. Okay? You already know the Pentateuch. Add Joshua, Judges, Ruth, and then add SKC. And each one of those SKC letters has got 2 books. Roman numeral 1, 1 Kings, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, 2 Kings, 1 Chronicles, 2 Chronicles. Man, we're getting on with it now. We've worked way down into the Old Testament already. How many books is that?
14.
Total of 14. There are only 39, right, in the Old Testament. We've got 25 left. I'm a mathematical genius. So, isn't that a good thing? We're learning. That's your takeaway for today. If you don't get anything else, you've already memorized the first 14 books of the Old Testament. All right. Any questions? Barbara had some questions, and she asked me at the beginning of class, and I said, why don't you re-ask those, because other people may be wondering.
Which one would you first?
Do you remember what they are?
My first question was about the Ezra and Nehemiah, but does it really say that Ezra wrote the books? And when you look at it, it talks about how Ezra got the law from Moses. So I'm sort of confused. Did Ezra really write the first 5 books?
Okay, so I'll try to answer that. I took a leap there. Okay, so I'll just own up to that. To begin with, I gave you some scripture passages, one from Ezra and one from Nehemiah, and they basically talked about the fact that that Ezra was involved in reading the law of Moses to the people. Now, I did not mean to say that that was evidence that Ezra had pulled the material of the 4 sources. We're going to review the 4 sources again in just a moment. I did not mean to say that Ezra had pulled all that material together. But the point is that after the return from the exile, it's obvious that Ezra was involved after the return from the exile in reading this material. Okay, so there's no evidence there that he pulled it together, but there is evidence that he read it to the people and was involved in making sure that they knew it. So some scholars have leapt from that to the idea that Ezra may have been, if there was one person who did it, and there probably, if not one, were just a few involved, then this may point to Ezra as the person who did it. I didn't mean to say that there was evidence. Barbara's a police person, so she's always looking for hard evidence. Anything else?
But then I found in our reading about how in Genesis the stories are written differently, which suggest 2 different authors.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that today. There are really 2 accounts of creation in Genesis. Have you noticed that yet?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Genesis tells the story of creation, then it tells the story of creation again in chapter 2, and it's different.
Yeah.
And so we'll talk about that in just a moment. Also, the readings. We're sort of off track with our syllabus, the course syllabus I gave you, and some of you are trying to keep up with the readings. I'm going to be giving you some new reading to do today, and then if you have questions about what you should be doing, just feel free to ask. I'll certainly do all I can to try to make sure that you're getting that alongside the amendment. Are there any other questions just before we forge ahead? I want to just review the 4 sources with you. Do you remember anything about that material? About what we said? I should mention the name of Julius Wellhausen. Julius Wellhausen. That's Wellhausen. Wellhausen. Now, we would say Wellhausen here in America, but Kathy Bratt knows that it's properly pronounced Wellhausen. Because he was German, you see. And there's really no W in the German language. When you see a W in the German language, it's pronounced like V. Now, Wellhausen is the original guy who said that Moses probably did not write all of the first 5 books of the Bible, that there were at least 4 strains of writing there. So he traced these 4 literary strains, and he called them what? Did you take notes last time? J. Now, what do we call JJ? He prefers the name of the use of the name. This writer prefers the name of God to be Yahweh. Jahweh. Now, again, this goes back to the German pronunciation because we would spell it Yahweh, or in Hebrew, it's going to look like this. It's a Yod, He, Wah, Te. Okay? Yahweh. And then also that source originated in Judea, which was the southern, or Judah, which was the southern kingdom. Judah became known as Judea in Roman times. It was the Roman province of Judea, but in the earlier history of Israel, it was Judah, from the tribe of Judah. And that's where we get Judaism and Jew from, by the way, as well. And then the northern kingdom, of course, during that same period of time was Israel. So you had Israel in the north, Judah in the south. Now, the northern kingdom was also known as Ephraim. E-P-H-R-A-I-M, Ephraim. So Ephraim was another name for Israel. So the source that came from the northern part of Palestine was the E source. We also call it the E source because that writer prefers the name Elohim for God. And then we have the D source. The D is a Deuteronomist. He's the person who was involved in the law, keeping track of the law and imparting the law to us. And then there's the priestly source, which would be P. So the four sources of the Wellhausen hypothesis, or the documentary hypothesis. It's also called the four-source theory. So if I throw any of those three terms on you, I'm talking about the same thing, okay? And all those have to do with where the Pentateuch came from. So that's just review. But I wanted to review it because we're about to jump into Genesis with both feet here, into Genesis 1. And it's going to come up. It has to do with the question that Barbara asked earlier on. And by the way, I like it when you ask questions because I know you've been reading ahead and thinking about this stuff in between. That's important too. Some of you have said, man, I feel like I'm back in college because I'm reading that textbook and I'm having to get prepared for class, and thank you for taking it seriously. All right, let's look at Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. And I want to remind you to bring your Bibles with you. If you don't have a Bible, maybe you can look on with someone else today. And the source that I'm reading from is the Revised Standard Version. If you have the New Revised Standard Version, or if you have something close to it, you'll be in good shape. Okay? Now, before we start to read, I want to point out to you that the work of God in Genesis 1 is described as having taken place in 6 days. God works days 1 through 6, and on the 7th day, what does God do?
He rests.
Rests. My dad tells the story that when he was a boy, they always wanted to go somewhere on Sunday because that was the only day that they didn't have to work on the farm. And so the best way to get somewhere on Sunday was to ride a mule because nobody could drive. And, you didn't want to have to walk 5 miles to see your girlfriend or what have you. And but there was a rule against riding the mules on Sunday because my grandfather said that if God rested on the 7th day, everything else was supposed to rest too. That's why I had to sit around when I was a boy on Sunday. We couldn't even breathe. I wanted to go fishing and play baseball and do all the stuff my friends were doing. And, being the preacher's kid, my parents thought I would set a bad example. And sometimes I think that's why preacher's kids have the reputation of doing or stir crazy. From what did God create the universe? What's the stuff that God made the universe out of? It's a Latin phrase called creatio. I'm going to write it up here if I can find my marker. That thing keeps getting gone. Creatio ex nihilo. Creatio ex nihilo. And it means creation out of nothing. Creatio ex nihilo. So you can throw that on somebody later today and impress them to no end. Creation out of nothing. Can God do that?
Oh, yeah. God.
Now, if I'm going to build a house or an outbuilding or something like that, I have to go down to Lowe's and get my stuff. That takes longer than building the thing. You get your materials and your tools together and to get ready to get started. But God spoke and divided the heavens from the earth. And God put in place the stuff. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void. What's a void? Nothing. Well, there you go.
Emptiness.
Yeah. And darkness covered the face of the deep. There was no light, was there? There was nothing. While a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. Now, it's interesting that in Hebrew, I'll write this word up here for you. I'm going to put it up here in English and in Hebrew. The word is ruach. Ruach. Resh, Wa, Aleph, Kaf. Ruach. And it means wind. But it also means spirit. And it also means breath. And we have different words for those things in English, but in Hebrew it's just one thing. So when God breathed the life into man, God gave his spirit as well, you see. And do you recall the story of Ezekiel in the valley of the dry bones? We won't sing the song, but it's the story. After the bones were knitted together, what did God do? He breathed. A wind blew. And those bones got up and became a great army. You know that story. So it's important to remember that when God caused a wind to blow, God was breathing his spirit and he was giving life to creation. A wind from God swept over the face of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. Now, you'll notice at the end of every day's work, throughout these first few verses of Genesis, the writer is clear to tell us it was the first day. And God said, "Let there be a dome in the midst of the waters. Let it separate the waters from the waters." So God made the dome and separated the waters that were under the dome from the waters that were above the dome. And it was so. And God called the dome sky. And there was evening and there was morning, the second day. And God said, "Let the waters under the sky be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the earth put forth vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees of every kind on earth that bear fruit with the seed in it." And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed of every kind, and trees of every kind bearing fruit with the seed in it. And God saw that it was good. That's a great refrain, isn't it? Any of you ever build something and then you just want to stand back and look at it? Mm-hmm. There might be some other things you didn't want to look at after you built, but you're not God. Yeah, I want to tell you that I spent this past Saturday repairing a kitchen cabinet that we have that where the shelves kept falling out of it. budget deal when we built the house. I think by the time we got to the cabinets, we'd spent our budget, and we put these cabinets were some particle board things, and you know how that stuff is, not very good. And so after the shelves had fallen out of it, what happened was that the top shelf would come loose, and then it took out all the bottom shelves as it went down, because this is the pantry area, and it's got all that heavy all those canned goods in it. So, it just collapsed. And Debbie was in tears, and something had to be done. So I rolled up my sleeves and went to Slows, as I call it, and bought some plywood and lined that thing with plywood, put wood screws into the inside, and I put real strips of wood in there, furring strips to hold those shelves up. Man, it's as solid as a dollar right now. And a real moral victory, too, by the way. And so I have to tell you that every morning when I go to get my cereal out of the pantry, I just stand there and admire that. I saw that it was good. That's what God was doing. God was admiring the beauty of what He had created. He saw that it was good. God said, "Let there be lights in the dome of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And let them be lights in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth." And it was so. God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, the sun, obviously, and the lesser light to rule the night, the moon and the stars. God set them in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, the fourth day. And God said, "Let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly over the earth, above the earth, across the dome of the sky." So God created the great sea monsters, and it must be where Nessie came from. And every living creature that moves of every kind with which the waters swarm, and every winged bird of every kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth." And there was evening and there was morning, the fifth day. Stop me at any point that you have a question or want to talk about anything. Some of this stuff is very straightforward, transparent. Other things may raise a question in your mind. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures of every kind, cattle and creeping things and wild animals of the earth of every kind." And it was so. God made the wild animals of the earth of every kind, and the cattle of every kind, and everything that creeps upon the ground of every kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth." So God created humankind in His image. In the image of God He created them, male and female He created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth." God said, "See, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is upon the face of the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food." And it was so. God saw everything that He had made, and indeed it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all their multitude. And on the seventh day God finished the work that He had done, and He rested on the seventh day from all the work He had done. So God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, because on it God rested from the work that He had done in creation. So this is the establishment of the Jewish Sabbath, and consequently our Sabbath as well. Now, the word Sabbath It's from the Hebrew Shabbat, which means to drop. I'll spell that in English for you. Shabbat. And you'll hear Jews sometimes speak of the Shabbat. They'll say it in Hebrew rather than in English. But the word Shabbat means to drop. So how does that apply to what happens on the Jewish Sabbath, which is Saturday, and our Sabbath, which is on Sunday? What are we supposed to do on the Sabbath?
Drop everything.
Drop everything. Drop our labors and our distractions and pay attention to God that day. Now, as you know, the Sabbath observance is hurting in our modern time, but we can do our part to still keep the Sabbath. Now, as you know, there are some Sabbath keepers Christians who observe the Sabbath on the Sabbath. Does everyone know why we observe the Sabbath on Sunday, Christians? It's the day of resurrection. The church changed that because the day of resurrection became more important to the church than the Jewish Sabbath over time. But Jews and Seventh-day Adventists and some other denominations still observe the Sabbath on Saturday. By the way, I understand that, I don't want to get over into a controversy here, but I understand that some of our children and teachers are going to be going to school this Saturday, which is a Sabbath for some people. I presume those people will keep their kids home that day. All right, let me get over into some potentially controversial territory here. Do any of us believe that, you won't be ridiculed if you do, okay? But is there anyone here who believes that God created all of this in 7 24-hour periods?
Yeah, probably not. The time is different.
The Hebrew word for day can mean one revolution of the earth as the earth revolves. But it can also mean an indefinite period of time. So we have to try to understand whether the Genesis account here of creation is talking about one of man's days, and God's not limited by our days, okay? Or whether the Genesis writer is talking about a God day. Now, God is an eternal being. God exists in eternity. God's not limited by the revolutions of the earth or, the orbit of the earth around the sun. So I'm not bothered by the concept that God's days are a lot longer than mine.